Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Delta DNA webinar. Today we're going to be looking at player segmentation, and I'll take you for a walk around the system and show you how to set up some player segments and what you can actually do with them. The webinar should last not more than about 30 minutes. I'll try and go through things reasonably quickly, and if you have any questions along the way, by all means stick up your hand and type your question into the question box, and we'll pick them up at the end and kind of see if I can go over anything that anyone's needing further information on. And as always, don't forget the webinar will be published on our documentation portal probably tomorrow, and there will be a supporting PowerPoint deck that you can download that will cover some of the stuff I'm going to go through as well. So the agenda today, I'm going to show you what you can actually use segments for, how you can create player segments. There are a few different ways of creating them, what the segments are based on, whether they're based on player metrics or player events, and as I said, we'll cover off any questions at the end. So the first thing probably to tell you is just to give you an overview of what a segment is. A segment, quite simply, is just a group of players that can be described by a certain set of criteria, a certain set of rules. And you can then use those segments in a whole bunch of different ways. Actually, these form a very powerful kind of core of functionality in Delta DNA, because you can use your player segments as advanced filters on any of your dashboard charts. You can use them to filter and refine any of your analysis queries in the slice and dice tool, funnel tool, etc. And most importantly, you can use these player segments to target specific player groups with A/B tests, specific campaigns that can modify the game behavior, or you can target them for push notifications and do much the same thing. And finally, segments, as I touched on, I'll show you the different types of segments, how they can be based on player metrics or events. So first of all, let's take a look at some of the things you can actually do with segments. I'll switch across to our demo game. So this is, you may have seen this before, this is our demo Delta Crunch game that when you sign up to Delta DNA, everybody gets access to this data set, so you can see what a fully fleshed out data set looks like and how it's configured. So we'll use this kind of to show off some of the features. So if I drill into the measure dashboard charts area, in here we've got 50-60 different standard charts that are common across all games, and we've got a common set of filters across the top here, and you'll see, in fact I've even already got one populated. You can use player segments as a filter on any of these charts. So just waiting for this to populate, you'll see that if I filter this by a segment we've created that is all the players from acquisition channels 1 and 2 only, you'll see it's showing us 5,125 users. If I clear that out, you'll see that the full data set is actually a bit bigger than that. So that was looking at just a subset of the players in that segment. We have all our other filters up here. We can combine these filters together. So I could look at just players on a specific platform or player cohorts that started on a specific day. But what you'll see is any segments we create will be visible in this segment drop-down list and selectable. What you'll also see in this game, there's quite a lot of segments. Because this is just a demo game, we tend to create all sorts of things just for demo purposes. You will find in your games, though, we auto-generate a bunch of segments here with reasonably descriptive names. I'll touch on these throughout the webinar and kind of show you them again. But we also have our own segments that we've created ourselves. So let's just do another one. Let's segment by our game launched, our fictitious game fictitiously launched in Australia, Canada, and the UK first. So here's a segment we've set up just to test that, and you'll see if we leave it a second or two, it will populate out all the charts for just that player segment. So that's how simple it is to use player segments to filter any of your charts. And this filter block is available right through the entire measure section, including the retention matrices and cohort comparison tool down at the bottom. So that's the first place you can use segments. So very powerful, even if that was all it could do. However, you can also use player segments throughout your analyze tools as well. So if I come into, for example, the slice and dice tool, I can start building very custom queries that are targeting just specific events or specific parameters within an event and start looking at them. So let's just build a quick query here. We'll look at the days, number of unique players on the last 30 days. So let's pick up our measure for the unique users, we'll pop that into the columns panel, and we'll pick up the event date, we'll pop that on the rows, and we'll sort it by event date and run the query. And you'll see we're getting 3,000 to 4,000 users, generally over 4,000 users each day. I've sorted that the wrong direction, but that doesn't matter. You'll see here we've got segment all users. If I click on this magnifying glass, I can actually filter specifically by, here's those same segments all over again. So let's take a look, see how many people we had in our Australian lunch group. Rerun the query. Now go to a far smaller subset of the users in that Australia segment. And of course, I can, this being sliced and diced, I can turn that into a chart, I can save it, and I can even paste that onto a custom dashboard into one of my custom dashboards in here, should I want to, using the custom dashboard editor tool in the setup section. So you can set up custom dashboard charts with specific charts that are filtered by different player segments, so you can compare and contrast them nice and easily. The other analyze tools that support the segmentation is the funnel tool. So your funnel tool, let's just load one up. So the mission difficulty funnel and run it. And you'll see up here in the top right, I've got a drop down, so I can pick up just players that are in specific segments. And the lifetime value predictor is the same story. It's the same filter block. We've got segmentation up here. It will take a couple of seconds to populate because it's completely rerunning that query. There we go. And the final place you'll see the segments showing themselves is in the engage tools. And this is where they start getting really, really powerful, because rather than just using them as filters on your charts or refinements on your analysis, when you start bringing the segments into your engage tools, it lets you start building very targeted engagements where you can change the behavior of your game and target specific player groups. So if I let's set up a new A/B test based on mission difficulty, and not give it a real description. We'll set up a start and end date for this. We'll just run this for a week, and we'll choose that. So the very first thing I see when I come into the selection page, one of the first questions it asks me is, who do I want to include in this test? I could have just new users, or I can have anybody from any of my player selections. So here's the same group of selections appearing all over again. So you see just from that last 5 minutes, the whole concept of player segments is woven right through large parts of the Delta DNA platform. So the next thing to show you really is how you build a segment, what describes a segment. So if we go into the Analyze section of the navigation and scroll down, you'll see we have a whole segmentation panel down here. We have 3 different types of segment we can build, and I'll tell you a bit about them in due course. But first of all, I'll show you possibly the simplest segment I can. So this particular one, you saw all the automatically generated segments. Let's take a look at this one here, the auto-generated whales segment. The description says this is users who have spent more than $100. So if I edit the segment, you'll see it is based on a simple rule here using a generic metric called total real currency spent, and it's looking for a value that's greater than or equal to 10,000 cents. So the defining what is a player segment is really as simple as that. You can get more complicated, you can add more conditions. So you'll see some of the automatic segments might be measuring multiple conditions. So it might be a whale is maybe between $100 and $500, and we might have a mega whale that's above that. So you can set up multiple conditions, and you can even add additional logic in here and say, well, we want this condition and that condition, or this one down here. So you can set up reasonably complex logic to look at your different player segments. Let me just get rid of that. I'll get rid of that because I don't want to break this one. We'll come back out to the Manage Segments page. So what we just did there, we saw a segment that was totally based on just some simple rules based on player metrics. There are multiple different types of metrics that you can use. So if I go back into, well, let's just create a whole new one. So first thing I do is give it a name and a description, and you'll see it's completely empty at the moment. So let's set up some criteria. The different types of metrics I've got available to me fall into 6 different categories. You saw me using a generic metric on the whale segment, so that was using just a total real currency spent value. What these generic metrics are, these are essentially things that we think are pretty important, so we'll automatically keep account of them, that will be continuously updating as your players play through the game. So every time they log in, you'll see the total sessions played metric will increment for each player. So generic metrics are just ones that we think are pretty important, and we're going to calculate automatically without you needing to worry about. The next category of metrics we have are event-based metrics. So what these give you is a count of any of the events that your game is recording, and again, incrementing in real time as the system is running. So if you want to see how many times a player has leveled up, you could simply take a count of the level up event. So let's get everybody that's greater than level 10. That would be one way of doing it. Level up count greater than 10. There are multiple ways of doing a lot of things in Delta DNA though, so segmentation metrics is no exception. We could also use a parameter value, and we have numeric and string-based parameters. So this parameter section is showing us all the numeric ones, and for each numeric parameter that you want to track as a metric, you can see several different aggregates are available to you. So for example, here's our user level one. We've got the minimum and maximum user levels, the first and last value that we've seen in that parameter, and we have a count and a sum of the number of times that parameter has been used. So in reality, you probably don't need to know the count, the number of times the user level parameter has been used. That's probably not terribly useful, but certainly things like the last value of the user level, very interesting. So that's another way of, there's a second way of finding all the players who are greater than level 10. String-based parameters, we don't have quite as many aggregates. What you can see on string-based ones is just the first and last value of them. That tends to be very useful if you're wanting to filter by the country somebody's playing in, if you're passing that through, or if you want to see what's the last mission name they played before they defected. If you think you have a retention issue, you can quite easily set up a segment that is based on specific mission names, or you can run queries and find players who have reached level 10 but haven't played in the last 7 days. So you can get pretty sophisticated with this. So the string-based ones is the first and last of any parameters, any string parameters that you're using. The final two categories, derived metrics. This is where we let you create new metrics based on existing ones. So the average session length, if we were to actually drill into that and see what it looks like, you'll see that it's simply the total time played in milliseconds divided by the number of sessions. That gives us the average session length. You can add your own derived metrics. Just choose the different metrics and choose the mathematical operators to apply to them. And the final one, virtual metrics. These are things that we also think are very important, but we have to calculate them for you. They're not directly accessible through the data. So this is things like the number of days since somebody last played, the most often played mission, most common mission name, things like that. So you might see that this virtual metric list may expand over time. So those are the different classes of metrics that you can use to build a segment. The different types of segment I touched on, there are 3 different types of segment that you can play with. So the first and simplest one that we were using is a manual segment. The next one I'll show you is what's called a visual segment. And these use, if you've ever looked at the user mining tools, these use the user mining tool as a starting point for the segment. So let me just load up this one. What the user mining tool lets you do essentially is put any 3 metrics on a chart against each of the 3 axes, a three-dimensional chart. And it's a good way of finding kind of outlying clusters of players who are behaving differently from others. So this particular one, I just clicked on it, I'm not actually even sure what this one's telling us. We've got the total days played on the x-axis, the number of missions failed on the y-axis, and we've got the total number of sessions played on the height and z-axis. So that's a visualization. If I was demonstrating the user mining tool, we could spend a bit more time on this and set up a perhaps more interesting looking chart, but I'll not do that today. The more important thing to understand is you can use this tool to find groups of players and think, okay, this group here looks quite interesting. So you can then actually build a segment to target just those players. So let's just do exactly that. So just wait for my Manage Segments page to reload. And we'll add a new visual segment. And it's giving me a drop-down list. So I'm just going to choose that one we're looking at, add that in, and it's going to show me the visualization again. There it is, but this time round I've got some extra options, and I can actually start clicking on the bars and selecting them to include these groups of people in my segment. From here I can then actually even look and see how many players that is. At the moment that's 18,199 players, and the rules for the segment are they've played between 4 and 24 days, and the mission failed between 4 and 161. I could then save that and use it as a segment. Behind the scenes, everything that's going on here, all these tools, all they're really doing is actually building SQL queries to find lists of user IDs. So one thing I can do, I can convert this visual segment into a manual segment, and it will simply show me the same sort of logic that we saw when we looked at the whales segment. So you can see here it's doing exactly the same thing behind the scenes. And ultimately what all that actually boils down to, if you click, you've maybe not spotted this before, but there's a little downwards arrow between each of the segments on the segment management page. If you click that, it will actually reveal the SQL that is used to generate the segment, and you can then paste that into direct access or go digging a little bit deeper. So if we look at our whales segment, if I want to look at the SQL behind that, we're selecting the user IDs from the metrics table where the total real currency is greater than 10,000. So nice and simple. The final type of segment is slightly different. This one is called a target list. So important differentiation. When you look at segments in the dashboards and in the analysis tools, what you're actually looking at is a snapshot of the latest state for a player's metrics last time they were updated, and they are updated every day. So essentially you're seeing yesterday what was the final state of all the players' metrics. When you're running on the engaged stuff, when you're doing A/B tests and targeted campaigns, those are running completely live, literally up to the millisecond. So when you create metrics and when you create segments and use them in Engage, the values, the players are moving in and out of segments, and segments are updating literally millisecond by millisecond. So that is absolutely live, red hot interactions. When you're analyzing your data, what you're seeing is just the snapshot of their metrics as of yesterday. So it's good for analysis, but the Engage stuff is where it's absolutely live. The difference between these different segment types is the visual and manual segments are recalculating in Engage in real time continuously. So that's great for interacting with players as they're playing with the game, because you're acting on the very latest information, and literally as they join a segment within milliseconds, you can be targeting them and altering the game for them. The target list is slightly different. It's a list of users that's regenerated overnight, every night, and typically what it's used for is for re-engagement. So you tend to use a target list to build things like, find me all the users who reached level 10 and I haven't seen in 2 weeks, because I want to send them a push notification to try and bring them back into the game. So that's typically when you would use a target list. And the other difference with the target list when you set one up, let's just look at this one. The target list doesn't build against your metrics, it's actually using the events. So if you've used Slice and Dice or the event mining tool, what you see in these drop downs will look familiar, because what you're seeing now is, rather than metrics, you're seeing event parameters. So in this particular one we were looking at, this was poor performance. So this is where the event name was mission failed and their life balance is 0. So it's just a slightly different type of player segment, and that's essentially how you build player segments. Reasonably straightforward. The final bit of the equation that I'll show you, so we've looked at this page using segments, we've explained the 3 different types of segments, and I've explained the different types of metrics. The final piece of the equation is where do these metrics come from? How do you specify them? So when you add your game to the system, we will automatically add 7 events, I think it is, although it may be increased last week with the last update, but there's some standard events that we'll add to every game. And these generic events, generic metrics will be populated for each game. The counts of the standard events will be in there as well. However, only certain parameters and string-based metrics will be included on day 1. And these will be the ones that we know are the important ones based on the standard events. So that will be things like user level, mission, you will want to do. You will get to a point where you think, well, that I've just added a certain parameter to my game. That's a really interesting parameter. I would like to set that up as the metric. The way you do that, I'm just clicking buttons too quickly here, so just let me catch up. The way you do that, if you go into Setup section and into Manage Game Parameters, you can edit any of the parameters you've got. So let's pick one that's unlikely to be already a metric. This might seem a bit kind of random, but I know most of these probably are already metrics. Yes, that one already is. Essentially, what you do, if you click on the Edit Game Parameter section, you'll see there is a metrics section in the parameter description, and you can turn parameters into metrics here. So if you had a new parameter that you've added that isn't a metric, just come into your game parameters, click on it, and then check the boxes. And you'll see with integer ones you get all 6 numeric aggregates. With string-based ones you'll just get the first and last available. And then when you come down to your events, you'll also see, if you go into any of your events and click on the parameters, you'll see that the metrics boxes will either be lit up or we're sitting empty. So that's how you set up a metric. And that's, I think, in 25 minutes dead, is a rough overview of how segments work. I noticed a couple of questions, I think, so let's have a look, see what we've got. First question, do you have a way to use the segmentation for new players? Absolutely. So couple of ways of doing this depending on what you're trying to do. If you are targeting users with, say, an A/B test, you saw, let's get this to load, when I select who I want in the A/B test, which one is this? Let's open this one. If I go to the selection page, you'll see I've got my player segments here. So let's pick up my acquisition channel 1 and 2 players. I've also got a target new players one. So as a lot of the tools, you can target only new players without having to build the new player conditions into the segment. So you can do that there. If I was in funnels, I can do exactly the same. So I've got my segments here, but I've also got a new players only checkbox. If you want to build the conditions into the segment, then you probably can as well. Let's just think what would be the best way of doing that. New player, well, a new player is going to be things like they've maybe only had 1 session or less than 5 sessions. They're maybe on a user level less than 2. So there'll be things about your game in particular that you'll be able to use as conditions for setting up those segments. I would say player date stuff, but I'm not going to, because the metrics tend to be string and numeric based. There aren't date based metrics for you to use in there yet, but watch this space. So simple answer to that, yes, you can segment on new players. There's a few different ways to do it though, and it probably depends what works best for you. Next question. When I plot the daily active users of players who are level 10 plus, would the number of DAU would I see for a data point 1 week ago? Right, I've not read the whole question, but I think I can see where it's going. The player segments are continuously evolving. So if you use a player segment of players who are less than 10 and look at data in your charts that is 6 months old, you will be seeing the player level of the player as he is today, not as he was 6 months ago. So the segments are continuously continuously evolving. So you can't, if you're filtering on very old data, it might look a little odd. I want to know how to use it in notifications. Good. So let's go down to here in my push notification section. So I'm in Engage here, and I'm in push notifications. If I start creating a new notification, it's going to show me pretty much the same player selection as the A/B tests and targeted campaigns. So first I'm just giving this a name and a description, but here we go. Select the player segment or target list. So here's some of the segments we've been playing with already. Here's our acquisition channel 1 and 2 users, our Australia only users, and any other segments I set up can be targeted directly in here. And I can choose a time to send and go in and start building my push notification. So just the same type of player selection panel as you'll see for other tools. And I didn't see the option for new players there. Well spotted. We don't have a new player checkbox on the push notifications, but you're right, it does exist on A/B tests and targeting. So good spot. I will add that to the feature list. That would be a good one. The other way of doing that would be, as we've kind of already touched on, to probably put your new player selection criteria into the actual segment. And I think that's all the questions we've got. Oh, if there's any more questions, if you're quick, we'll answer them. Failing that, as always, use the help and support buttons up on the top of the portal to get to the help documentation. For segmentation, it's under analytics segmentation, and the support button on the side of the documentation site or on the main site will get you a hotline to Louise, myself, and others on the team. We can help you out and get back to you as quickly as we can.
I think there's one last question that's come in, Laurie. So if we want to run a clustering on top of those user attributes, how would you do that?
Ooh, a cluster. I'm not even sure. I'm not entirely sure I understand the question completely. But clustering based on those user attributes. Not totally 100% sure what you're trying to do there. That's when we start getting into the really hardcore analytics stuff as well. That's where I need to start handing off to my colleagues in the analytics team. So maybe if you want to put that one in a support ticket, I can pass it on to my colleague Isaac in the analytics team to answer. One thing I will quickly draw your attention to, though, let me just go backwards here. It wasn't part of this webinar, but the webinar we did last week on direct access is worth looking at if you're interested in exporting data from specific player segments or digging more deeply into it. And I suspect if for clustering, that may be the kind of direction you're kind of thinking of. So what you can do in there, if I look at any of my player segments, let me just pick one up. Let's go in here. So if I look at the SQL that was used to generate that, I can copy and paste the SQL and use the direct access tools to actually connect directly to the data warehouse using whatever my favorite SQL tools are. We tend to use dbeaver an awful lot in-house here simply because it's free and it's actually pretty good. You can then paste your segment query into that. That will reveal all the user IDs, and then you can go off and do much deeper analysis on just those users and even export their user IDs, their push notification tokens, or whatever. So I think that's maybe where you were going with that question, but not 100% sure. But if that didn't answer it, by all means, just hit the support button. And if
Great.
that's that, thank you for joining us
Thanks,
and
Laurie.
see you in the next webinar next week. Cheers.